Now, if they're a budding entrepreneur, please do not start a school for the money. There are much better investments out there. Your returns are just not what they're going to be for other investments. So please don't start it for the money. So if they're sitting in front of me, I'd want to understand the real purpose. Also understand that once you've said you want to start a school, you're doing it for a higher purpose, you've got a plan in place, you've got to raise money, right? You need funding.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Advanced Podcast. I'm your host, Vikas Pota. Today, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Navin Valrani, an education entrepreneur and business leader whose career has been shaped by a simple belief that learning is a lifelong pursuit. As CEO of Arcadia Education and the Al-Shirawi Group, Navin has helped expand educational opportunities across the UAE, from establishing schools and mentoring programs to supporting young women through scholarships that open the door to higher education. Alongside his work as a leader, he has continued to invest in his own learning, studying at the Wharton School, the London Business School, the University of Pennsylvania, and UCLA before completing a doctorate in education. Navin, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Welcome to the Advanced Podcast.
Thank you, Vikas. Thank you for having me.
You have a very interesting journey. You're a very successful businessman in different industries. And then you've come of late to education with Arcadia Schools in Dubai. Can you tell us from your experience what makes a great school?
Wow. There's so many things. And obviously the stereotypical answer would be people and students. But quite honestly, it's not just people. It's people who care. And really, that's what it takes. Being in a school environment requires a tremendous commitment in every which way. And it's those committed individuals that make a great school, in my view.
And how do you find them?
So, you don't. Because when you do find them, they're actually not. Everyone can be committed in a certain environment, and as leaders, it's our job to create that environment. I don't believe that there is any individual on this planet, regardless of age, who cannot be committed to a particular cause. And once you define a purpose and you give people a reason to wake up in the morning and you have that positive energy that runs through the building, magic happens.
And how does this differ with running a business, say, one of your other Al-Shirawi businesses? Does that differ?
It actually doesn't differ as much as people think. When it comes to a school, it is an emotionally charged environment. Arguably an office is too, but in an office, those emotions are parked somewhere way back. In a school, they're up front and center. And those emotions need to be managed. But, because human beings are emotional individuals. Much of our decision-making is not rational. And therefore, we need to be able to manage emotions much more in a school building where we encourage those emotions to come out and be on full display. So it is different in the sense that in a corporate environment, those emotions are parked and don't surface. In a school environment, we encourage those emotions to surface, and that requires management.
And Navin, whilst you and I obviously know each other, I'm pretty sure that our listeners will want to hear about your journey in terms of how you've made it to running schools from this very successful and varied career and background that you have. Do you want to give them, an insight as to what brought you to where you are, where you're in this podcast with me sitting in a school with some school buses behind you, and you told me to expect the school bell to ring. How does that happen to someone as successful as Navin Valrani?
So I have to be very, very honest here. As much as this visually seems to be a story of an individual who has successfully pivoted from the corporate life to the education side, fundamentally, and while that's completely true, I don't want to take away from that story, but fundamentally, this is a commitment from a son to a father. And call it cultural, call it spiritual, but the fact is, Arcadia was a dream of my father. He thought of it in 2012, and he brought me on board in 2016, 4 years later, just before, 6 months before our school opened, with the dream and the mission to make it happen, to ensure that we create something that was truly unique in a landscape that was crowded with schools. It came down to, I'm not going to let my father down. I'm going to do whatever it takes. And that's what started my journey. And it was that commitment, until this day, it is that commitment that keeps me going.
And Navin, in terms of like when you think about those early days, there was no school. So tell us about the process, about how you came up with the product, as it were. What school you wanted, how you wanted it to look, feel, structured, what the offer was, and what the promise that you make to young people and their families is. How did you distill all of that, or was that clear at the outset? Is that stuff you've made up as you've gone along, as a result of experience? Tell us about how you've come to this position that you're in today.
So we had an overarching vision from our founder, my father, which was, he wanted a school that stood for happiness. And I don't know if you've had the chance to meet him, but he gave us a broad statement, which was, the school needs to stand for happiness, and happy teachers make happy students. And those were really the overarching guiding principles. When we got to it, operationally, to take that and translate it into reality takes a tremendous amount of work. And firstly, we had to get the building ready. And then the building itself, the architecture, and you've been to our schools, Vikas, the architecture was such that it stood for happiness. We have in all our school buildings plenty of open areas, lots of light, and the chairman, our founder, he sat with the architects and he said, I want these buildings to be to stand for love, and he used those words, and the architects looked at him like, what is this man on about? But he was very, very clear from the very, very start. And then it came down to the curriculum. And of course, we know we follow the English National Curriculum, but the English National Curriculum is not as prescriptive as it has, it has a reputation for being very prescriptive, but it does give a lot of flexibility to introduce and to initiate programs that really stand for student well-being. Whether it was making sure our teachers are happy, whether it was, hey, let's bring out the creativity in our students through our homegrown junior MBA program, whether it was, let's be at the door as owners, as leaders, every single morning to greet our parents. It was those little things. And believe it or not, it wasn't only the founding principal or the founding deputy, it was myself and the founder. Every single morning, there on the door, shaking hands of parents, listening to problems. And I've never seen anything like it in the history of schooling. I've now observed so many schools, but to have, in those days, a late 70s individual standing there and he doesn't need to be there, right? He's hired professionals. He's got me. But standing there, greeting parents, was really remarkable. So it was these touches that allowed us to take that vision and turn it into reality. And when you bring the investors close enough to the operators, and in our case, it was the same organization. The investors is Arcadia Education, the operators are Arcadia Education. You end up listening, and it's not just listening for the sake of listening. It's listening and acting. So a parent has an issue. Okay, this is a serious issue. Let's see how we can address it. So it was really those finer touches that allowed us to go from 77 students on day one in September 2016 to 4,500 students in September 2026. So it's been a remarkable journey.
So in those 10 years since you opened your doors to today, roughly, how has your thought process changed on how you manage people?
It has changed. And, I started my own education journey as Arcadia started. So, started qualifying myself and spending a lot of time around teachers who were also, in my cohort, in my class, as I did my first master, then my second, and then my doctorate. And what I realized is, and what really came to me as the North Star in schools is to individualize education for each child. Every child is different. And you hear this, right? You've heard it time and time again. But then I couldn't help but think, but every adult is different too. We never say that. We never say that in the corporate world. The corporate world is all about policies and standardizations and, what's your car policy? What's your mobile phone policy? What's your, it's all about standardizing. And it came to me that why are we standardizing? Why do we feel that it's okay to individualize at the school level, but the minute we get into the real world, no, we shouldn't individualize anymore? Why not? And really, that was it was a real aha moment for me, because I now, when I look at my leadership team across not only the schools but even the corporate side, I basically want to be part of their journey, and I want to understand their journey. You mentioned earlier, how do you get great people? And you asked me the question, and it's really about that understanding what they've been through. And whether that journey will mesh with the journey that we're on.
No, Navin, this podcast is really focused on a very simple subject, really, when you think about it, which is how do we get more high performing schools? And you have taken this school from an idea, and over 10 years have so many students in it, and you're affecting so many lives. What are the three lessons that you've learned about driving high performance, whether it's through the corporate commercial side of your other businesses or through your school, that you think those that are listening, who are leaders that running schools, running institutions, could actually take away today and implement in their own lives to make sure that they also drive high performance? That is what we need in education, I believe. So why don't you share your first lesson?
So lesson number one, and I often say this, and this is through my own experiences, is to accept that struggle is part of life. There's a tendency to talk about Gen Z characteristics. I'm not a buyer into that philosophy. Again, every individual has their own journey, regardless of which generation they belong to. But the fact is, the one consistent thing we know, regardless of generation, is that each individual will be faced with struggles. Those could be internal struggles, they could be external struggles, but they will be faced with struggles. And it's when you're faced with struggle, how you respond to that is absolutely crucial. There should be if I were to give one, so lesson number one, accept that struggle will be part of your life and embrace it when it comes along, no matter how challenging it is at the time. but embrace it and see it as an opportunity for learning and for growth.
How do you not just give up?
It's that broader purpose. You have to have a purpose, and that purpose has to be internal. I mean, in my case, Vikas, I highlighted this to you. It was about a son and a father's love, right? The love between a father and a son. That's my purpose. And struggles come along the way. They could be even personal struggles. They could be health struggles, but that remains consistent. And there has to be something, and this happens over time. You don't. I didn't have the recognition of this when I was 22. But over time, you develop. What do you really stand for, and what drives you? And family, to me, very, very important. My wife, my kids, in my earlier sort of my 30s and 40s, providing for and caring for my kids and being a good father to them was important. And then, funnily enough, as the kids left, we became empty nesters. My wife and I. It was about then being the good son and the good son-in-law. So life almost came like full circle. So I think it's important to have that purpose that overarches the struggle, so that when you go to bed at night and you're facing those challenges, you say, "But who am I doing this for?" Right? Let's not forget that.
Today's young people are more connected than ever before. And yet, our world has never been more divided. The future needs a different kind of leader. Introducing the Global Youth Council, a global fellowship for exceptional 16 to 18-year-olds from every continent and every discipline, bringing together young people from around the world to develop leadership, global citizenship, future readiness, and public impact through expert-led conversations, peer circles, real-world engagement, and a flagship summit experience. Global platform for young people who are ready to step forward, think bigger, and lead with purpose. Because the future will be built by those who know how to connect, collaborate, and lead across differences. Global Youth Council, growing the leaders we need for tomorrow, today.
That's a great lesson. That's a great lesson that you share. I was wondering whether how this plays with the vision of what you're trying to do, which is about to promote happiness amongst all the people that you look after in your schools, whether it's teachers, students. How do you reconcile just people going through a very tough time with your entire purpose being around happiness?
Look, it's difficult. And I think as a leader, when someone is going through a tough time, well, if they're not, so sometimes you can just read the body language, right? They're just not there. And it is my role and my responsibility to say, look, is everything okay? Is there anything I can help you with? And I do this with students as well. Is there anything going on that you feel it's okay to share with me? Maybe I can help in some way. And really also an acknowledgement that when you become part of that journey, become part of that problem, is you don't know what that person is actually feeling. And I think as a leader, it's important to acknowledge that. I don't know what you're going through, but I'm on your side. I'm part of your team. And when a leader says that to you, I mean, because you work with so many amazing individuals, but you can imagine when a leader says that to you, you go back home and you tell your spouse or you tell your parents, you won't believe what just happened to me today. The top guy in the organization is on my side.
That's pretty powerful.
So it's really important to say, I'm part of your journey. I hear you, but I acknowledge I can't know what you're feeling. It's a very individual feeling, but I'm with you.
What are the structures that you use in a school to actually, be present in the lives of your community? And so, fine, it's okay. You're saying one-on-one, I speak to people. Yes, I meet people at the school gate, all that kind of stuff. But if I had, I couldn't do that. But what are the structures you've put in place to actually reinforce this idea that struggles are part of life?
One of the things I've learned in this journey of education in school since 2016 is that most learning and most effective learning in organizational settings actually happens informally, not formally. So we do have formal structures. So we have committees, we have boards, we have staff representatives who attend, we have student representatives who attend, we have parent representatives who attend. But at the end of the day, it's not only the front gate; it's a coffee shop. So I have little things. So in the year in until last year, so 9 years, I wished every teacher happy birthday. Every single teacher. And why did I do that? I did that. How did I do that? I did that over WhatsApp. What was the purpose of that? So firstly, to wish them a happy birthday and make them feel good, but also by doing that, they have access to my phone number. Informally. There's no suggestion box. But there is that opportunity that if something is going wrong, we know the CEO's phone number. And another tactic, do we have a little cafeteria where we go buy coffee and stuff? Every time I go there and I see a teacher, I have a philosophy. I'll buy them whatever they're ordering. And the guy knows that, okay, CEO's here, it's taken care. So these little gestures where you create culture of I'm here for you, and feel free to share with me, what's there. And it's not always easy, right? There's no perfection here.
So your second lesson really speaks to me a lot. And I tell my kids and I tell others, like, discipline always trumps talent. And I said 90% of anything you do is just hard work. The rest is luck, talent, whatever other stuff that counts actually appears in this box. Tell us about your thoughts on this.
Not sure if you're hearing the school bell. It's probably very faint, but that's the school bell. So yeah, discipline trumping talent. It's tough, and
let me just stop you. Tell people about the school bell.
The school bell actually resonates with me, but it's not my idea. It's our founding principal of this particular school, Arcadia Global School, Andrew Wilson, who's an amazing, amazing man. He's a very jolly, energetic individual.
Yes.
He's actually arguably the most successful primary school principal that Dubai has ever seen, given how successful we were in opening the school. Now it's of course a through school, and he's the head of the whole school. But this is from BBC Sport Cricket. Every time it'd come on, we would have this jingle would be there. So for those of us who grew up in the 80s watching Ian Botham and David Power and Bob Willis, you would recognize this. So it's really an amazing story, and really, that speaks to about the happiness. We allow our leaders to be leaders. I know there are school groups out there that standardize websites, and like why? Every school is a different school. So I don't get the standardization piece. I don't see economies of scale in it. But hey, to each their own. But we allow every school to develop its own culture. We have 2 only, so it's easier. But we hopefully have a 3rd and a 4th. But yeah, coming back to discipline trumping talent. I think it's important that you will have good days, but you will also have bad days. You have to come to that acceptance, and struggle is part of that, right? So when you're struggling, you'll have more bad days than good days, but then you go through a good phase, you have more good days than bad days. But you have to have the discipline to get yourself out of bed, get ready. In my case, put on a 3-piece suit and get to work every single day. I mean, Vikas, you'll laugh, but in COVID, when we were working remotely, I would get up in the morning, I'd put on a 3-piece suit, I'd put on a tie, I'd even wear my shoes, and I'd go to the next room.
I have no doubt, Navin.
And my wife would be like, "What are you doing?" I said, "I don't want to give up. I don't want to let the pandemic get the better of me. We will go back. And I don't want it to be any different."
And tell us about your third lesson for high performance.
The third lesson is really something I've seen and learned. There's a lot of intelligent people in this world, but many of them, and leaders, don't actually take care of themselves. And I wonder, how can this person call themselves intelligent when they're not taking care of themselves? I mean, with all the research out there, with all the science out there, we all know we need exercise. We all know we need to eat healthy. Why don't we do it? I don't get it. And I think it's important that if a leader is not taking care of themselves, how are they going to take care of others? I cannot see. So, I mentioned in the very first sentence about great schools, it's people who care, but that fundamentally starts with care for yourself. And I use this when I recruit. I actually try and see, is this person looking after themselves?
Do you make them do push-ups?
Well, again,
you would if you could, right?
I would, and I would do it with them. I would say, look, I'm 55 years old. Let's go down and let's do 10 push-ups.
Any teacher that wants to work for Arcadia, please, you've got the scoop now. The inside, 50 press-ups, and you'll be okay.
One of the top sports schools in the city, thanks
Wonderful.
to our executive principal. So
wonderful. I want to switch gears a little bit because I remember one of the most inspiring things that you told me, and maybe you realize that you didn't, when we're talking about, you're a suit, in a school context. Why should a teacher take you seriously? And you told me about, you're right. I had that imposter syndrome myself. And tell people what you did about getting over that imposter syndrome. I thought it was very powerful, the story you narrated to me.
Yeah. Well, it's quite a story because when I was given the responsibility to be CEO of Arcadia Education, and I started networking, and I remember visiting a cocktail that was thrown, and all the big school groups were there, leaders were there, and there was someone from a school group who, meeting me for the first time, said, "Hey, so what's your background?" And I thought I had a pretty impressive background. I went to a great business school. I had been successful. So, I reiterated my background, and they looked at me. They frowned on me. And I went, they frowned at me, and I went home and I told my wife, I said, really odd. I've never introduced myself and been frowned upon. And she said, don't you get it? The world of education hates the world of business. They don't like what you stand for. Like, who cares about money, right? They didn't enter this profession or this industry for money. And I said, you know what? You're right. And that's when I decided that I'm not going to be the kind of leader that's just counting pennies and counting dollars and looking at financial statements. I'm going to become an educator. And I have to thank that man. His name is Clive. I have to thank him. He's a great man, by the way. I have to thank him because it was his reaction that prompted me to go back, do my master's in education, do research, get my doctorate, and as a result, get credibility from my own team.
How powerful! Leading by example. And tell us about this. This conviction that you have that young people must develop entrepreneurship skills. And you've developed the entrepreneurship MBA, if I'm not junior MBA, for your students, and you teach it yourself, which is very powerful given you have a very successful business background. Tell us about that.
Entrepreneurship skills is not the same as us wanting everyone to be an entrepreneur. So the idea of teaching these skills is not to train you to be an entrepreneur. You could become an entrepreneur one day, but the idea is to have those key characteristics that allow you to be successful no matter what profession you pursue. So that's objective one. What are those skills? So, we frequently talk about resilience. Successful entrepreneurs are very resilient individuals. They bounce back. They don't sit down. When faced with struggle, they pick themselves up. Those skills, we believe, can be taught in classrooms. from very, very young ages. And there's research behind this. So that's number one. Number two is this realization that enterprise can do good. I mean, Vikas, look what you do. It's just easy, right? And whether you're for-profit or non-profit, the fact is you can do good. I do believe much of the world's challenges, if not all of them, can and will be solved by private enterprise. And it's important we inculcate these messages in these young individuals so that when they go on to the real world, they say, you know what, great, year 4, I learned my first lesson on how companies can and should do good. And we need to create impact. There's no purpose having a business if you're not creating impact. But you've got to figure out what that impact is.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot about, in today's world where there's a lot of craziness, there's a lot of uncertainty. Over the last 2 months, I've spoken to a lot of education decision makers, including 30 presidents and vice chancellors of universities. And, the thing that I worry about a lot is, how do you advise a young person for what they should do in the future? Now, one can always say that actually it's always been that way. How do you prepare a young child for what happens in 12 years' time or 15 years' time, where, we don't actually know how to forecast what that looks like. We're holding the World School Summit next January with this entire topic, which is how do you prepare young people for the future of work? Navin, I know that you are you're, apart from being a CEO and a business owner and a very successful one at that, as well as having these doctorates and doing a master's in education, you're also a university counselor. And so do you want to speak a little bit about what advice you give young people to prepare them for a successful future, a more prosperous future?
There's so much guidance, but my relationship with students that I counsel is a mentoring relationship. I look at it as a mentoring relationship with the purpose that I am not only part of their journey for the next 3-4 years, but I am part of their life for the rest of
forever.
And that means a lot to me. I had dinner last night with one of my students who's now entering senior year at Babson College, and he told me, Navin, they call me by my first name. He said, Navin, you won't believe it. I mentioned your name yesterday. I said, why? He said, I was in a job interview and they asked me, do you have a mentor? And he said, I thought of you. And this boy, he gets onto the dean's list, and every single time he sends me, hey, Navin, I made it to the dean's list. And he sends it to me before he does to his parents. And these are the things that really matter to me on the why I'm doing this, on the guidance that I give. And there's so many pieces, right? But really fundamentally, the first one is 3 most important words in your life will be, I don't know. Remember that. Why? Because you are not expected to know everything. When you're young, you feel like you should know everything. And if you don't, now we have AI, and before we had the internet, and we could search it and we could research it, but we don't want to ask. Please ask. Because in asking, you build relationships, and you also acknowledge your humility that you don't know. And because I don't know if I'm sure you remember everything. I called you during the war. You were one of the people I called leaders, and one of them was you. And I wanted to hear your perspective. And you told me something, which I'll never forget, because it led me to increase my investment during that phase.
I'll take a cut. It's okay.
You said that this is Dubai. And the minute this thing stops, money will come. Money travels wherever, the conditions are attractive. Money will flow in. So I knew as opportunities were coming up during that phase and people were getting very nervous, I knew that Dubai will bounce back.
Correct.
And you were the one who really spelt it out to me in that sense. It was remarkable. I've never shared this with anyone, but I'm glad I'm sharing it in this forum, because it was you who really opened my eyes up to what this city stood for.
Well, Navin, when I think about like growth, and you think about you've gone from not having a school to having two schools today, and I think on this in this interview earlier, you said maybe a third, maybe a fourth. So what's the inside scoop?
Well, it's not an inside scoop once I say it on this podcast. It's
Which is
known to the
exactly
world.
the intention.
But in essence, we continue to believe in the city of Dubai. We will further invest in Dubai. We're already in talks to expand our footprint further. And really, and this is personal now. Once I got into this education track, for me, education is not about setting up another premium school that charges in sterling pounds another 25,000 pound plus fee. That's not why I entered education. I mean, I could have stuck in the corporate world. I want to bring affordable education to the masses. The challenge I feel we're having today is, amongst the glitz and glamour on the brand names, we're just almost forgetting that there's a population out there that is not being catered to, that can't afford the branded schools that seem to be coming in droves. And that's, when in the early days, one of the decisions we faced, believe it or not, because was, should we go down the branded route? It's not difficult, right? Top 10, top 20 list in the UK, approach them, percentage of revenue, franchise model, it's not tough. But we said no. Why? Because I said, we want to be them one day. 150-year-old history, 200-year-old history. That's number one. Number two, we want the flexibility to do what we want to do. So junior MBA couldn't have happened if I had a branded school. Oh no, I have process, I have a curriculum, I have a set way of doing things. So we were very particular to ensure that we remain independent and away from what brands impose on us.
If you had to conclude with three things that a budding entrepreneur could do to start up a school, what do you think those three things would be? Because there's lots of people who have this dream, right? I want to start my own school.
So the first thing is that you want to understand the why. It's easy to say you want to start the school, but the why. Now, if they're a budding entrepreneur, please do not start a school for the money. There are much better investments out there. Your returns are just not what they're going to be for other investments. So please don't start it for the money. So if they're sitting in front of me, I'd want to understand the real purpose. Also understand that once you've said you want to start a school, you're doing it for a higher purpose, you've got a plan in place, you've got to raise money, right? You need funding. And you get funding when you sit in front of investors. And there's plenty of money out there, but you sit in front of investors and you show a level of commitment and background that is typically not seen with others. So, that's why that's again why I want to, a frequent question I ask during interviews is, tell me about your childhood. Tell me what you went through. What were mom and dad like? What was home like? Right? Give me a little bit of an insight, because it's that story that allows me to determine that, is this person going to be committed to the cause? So you have to be supremely committed. You have to, again, care. And I think, and again, I do believe you cannot just be a finance graduate and start schools. You can. But in today's context, you need to have the education background. It's a must.
Navin, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure, hearing about your journey, your experiences, your thoughts that have shaped your approach to leadership and education. There's so many lessons like the latter that we've just had about what are your 3 tips to budding entrepreneurs who want to start a school. But the purpose of this podcast is to focus on high performance. And you said 3 particular things, which I think were pretty fabulous. First, you said, don't be afraid of struggle. It's often where resilience is built and some of our most valuable lessons are learned. The second you talked about is, whilst talent is important, discipline always trumps talent. The commitment to keep showing up and giving your best every day makes success sustainable. And finally, what I believe is probably the most important and the most thought-provoking lesson of all, which is leadership starts with yourself. If we aren't taking care of ourselves as leaders, it's difficult to take care of the people who rely on us, whether that's our students, our teachers, and our teams. Navin, thank you so much for sharing your journey, your reflections, and insights with us. For those that are listening to this interview and you enjoyed it or you found something useful that you can use in your lives or implement in your lives, I'd be grateful if you could subscribe, share, and follow the Advanced Podcast for future episodes on whichever platform you use to download or listen to podcasts. We'll see you on the next one, and thanks and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, Vikas.